shirts here, hands off everything. And as the merchants of death, it's very important for all of this. I was in the U.S. military for 29 years, retired as a colonel. I was a U.S. diplomat for 16 years, and in U.S. embassies in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Afghanistan, and Mongolia. I've been asked to speak at the tribunal's strong recommendations that reparations be made to individuals and communities that have been injured by weapons made by these manufacturers used. We're trying to take pictures. Oh, for God's sakes. Let's see. Injured by weapons made by these manufacturers used in U.S. military in action since 9/11. While this will no doubt be a controversial, hands off Palestine. Yeah, sorry, we're right in the middle. There will no doubt be controversial recommendations within U.S. political parties that use war as a weapon of conflict resolution, and within U.S. government agencies that implement the decisions of these elected leaders. The tribunal recommends that an agency be created within the U.S. Department of State, and that'll be Marco Rubio right now, that will be tasked with assessing the dollar amount of damages inflicted upon civilians as a result of the crimes that have been outlined by this tribunal. The agency would be charged with providing the necessary and appropriate reparations to individuals and communities that have been injured by the weapons used in military action since 9/11. An appeals board would be established within this agency comprised of international representatives of non-governmental human rights organizations to adjudicate disagreements arising from State Department reparations decisions. We may be going into the hearing, so you all may have to finish the rest of my statement because we can't miss going in there. Money for reparations administered by this agency would be generated by requiring firms with Pentagon contracts dated after October 7, 2001 onward to transfer to the reparations agency funds equivalent to the amount of their profits for that period. B, creating a surcharge to be determined on the annual revenue of all U.S. firms doing business in nations that have been subject to overt and covert military and paramilitary actions, retroactive to October 7, 2001. Creating a surcharge on revenue of all U.S. firms doing business overseas to accelerate paying off the U.S. debt that has been generated with the goal of supporting all U.S. military presence and action since October 7, 2001, which has directly and indirectly supported the overseas business of these firms. These funds would be distributed by the agency within the Department of State. Needless to say, the merchants of death weapons manufacturers would expend huge amounts of money on lobbying the U.S. Congress and presidential administrations to never implement this recommendation. It will be up to us, the citizens, to vote for congressional candidates and candidates for the U.S. presidency who agree to implement this recommendation. And that might not just do it. So it might be up to us to physically blockade congressional office buildings, be it congressional hearings, disrupt propaganda conferences, re-educate society, form alliances abroad, and pressure and reward incumbents and challengers until some congressional candidates and candidates for the U.S. presidency who will agree to implement this recommendation actually exist. So here we are in the U.S. Congress. You can see all the people that are here. We are going into this hearing on the confirmation for Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. And these recommendations are very important. So signing off from the U.S. Congress, Ann Wright.
Thank you, Ann. You are multitasking in the best sense of the word. Next, I'm very happy to introduce Bill Quigley. Bill Quigley is Professor of Law and former Director of Law Clinic at Loyola University. And Bill has been a longtime public interest lawyer, serving as counsel on issues for racial justice, housing, voting rights, the death penalty, and civil disobedience. Bill?
Good morning, everybody. I'm honored to be here with the people who have dedicated so much time to this issue, and all the 190 participants who are watching. And I recognize many people who are active in the efforts for peace and justice in here and around the world. I have a couple of specific points to raise, but I wanted to just say that last night I had a little bit of time and I put on Netflix, and you know what showed up was Schindler's List.
Yes.
And I thought that that was very appropriate for what we're doing here today, which is the contrast in wartime Germany between the high society and the capitalism that's going on, and people making money off of the unjust labor of others and creating materials to use in the war, and the horrors of the Jewish people in particular at that time in this movie, the executions, the terror, the displacement and the like. And I think it's really a message for us in this area, is that we can go forward with our regular lives with the comfort that is provided in North America, and only occasionally be alerted to what's going on. But the War Crimes Tribunal and the extra look at Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon and General Atomics really shows us what's going on. And there is horror, there is execution, there is mass death that is going on, and people are making great money doing this sort of thing. So it's a thank you for everybody who's worked on this to remind us of this. I have four sort of reality checks for those of us who want to do something about this. There are people who are working on this issue in the legal arenas around the world. In the United States, the Center for Constitutional Rights has brought action in federal court in California on behalf of the children in Palestine against the Biden administration over the crimes against Palestine and the provision of war, the equipment for war, the training for war, the technology for war. And that case has been very helpful to illustrate what is going on and the details of what's going on. They have not been successful so far, but they continue to fight. The second thing is that outside the United States, the French Human Rights Group, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, has brought massive efforts in the French courts and in the international courts to challenge their country's supply of arms and technical assistance over attacks in Yemen. And they have a 120-page complaint outlining the details of who did what and when and how many people have been killed and infrastructure that's necessary for life, how it's been destroyed. Those challenges continue. Third point is that there are other efforts in Canada, Denmark, Germany, Ireland, the Netherlands, and the UK, where various human rights groups partner with Palestinian solidarity groups, file lawsuits and government challenges to arms shipments and the like, calling these things what they are, which is genocide, and saying that these are not only immoral, but they are illegal. And they violate international treaties and domestic law as well. And I guess the fourth thing that I would say is that, the legal system, we know there's a big difference between law and justice. I mean, those people who are part of this tribunal, but also those of you who are watching as participants, you have lived lives that try to embody justice and try to point out the gap between law and justice. And there's some good laws on the books that are not enforced. There are other laws that are not so good that are enforced, usually against the people who point out the gap between law and justice. But all of these actions, whether they're by human rights groups or individuals or the kinds of actions that other people are talking about, are raising the issue, are educating the public, are disrupting the status quo. I think it's great for all of us that Anne Wright embodies what we're trying to do, which is to use our intellect, use our life experiences, research and find out what's going on, and then not just leave a report out there, but to implement that report by legislative action, speaking out, being in the halls of power, calling out the hypocrisy, and so under public pressure, some governments in the world have temporarily suspended export licenses. They have withheld weapons exports, and they have begun to recognize the legal restriction on trading arms. And that is not stopping what has happened, but it is slowing it down. It is creating friction. It is helping people understand what's going on. And that, I think, we owe a great debt to the tribunal for putting out all these details and all the visuals and all the interviews, and change is happening. And the only way it will happen is a combination of our brains and our bodies and our hearts. And I think I'm just personally grateful for the work of the tribunal and for all the people who are participants and watching and who are continuing these struggles. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. We have one more speaker today before we take questions from the press and from the audience. Rania Masri's research and activism have centered on anti-war issues, sanctions, and anti-occupation issues, as well as environmental justice and voting rights. She is currently the co-director of the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network, and she is also one of the jurors of this tribunal. Rania?
Thank you, Brad, and thank you all for this marvelous work. The final report of this tribunal begins by reminding us that in 1914, despite major opposition, Congress voted overwhelmingly in favor of war. The politicians then defied the people they were supposed to represent. Why? As J.P. Morgan, one of the largest investment banking firms in the world, then wrote, profit motives drove U.S. involvement in World War I. In 1934, Senator Gerald Nye's extensive investigation of U.S. corporations, including weapons manufacturers, uncovered criminal and unethical actions, including bribery of foreign officials, lobbying the U.S. government to obtain foreign sales, selling weapons to both sides of international disputes, and the covert undermining of disarmament conferences. Senator Nye declared in a 1934 radio address that they are, quote, international racketeers bent upon gaining profit through a game of arming the world to fight itself. Almost 100 years later, their horrors have only grown. The United States is the world's #1 institutional polluter, domestically and internationally. The United States has nearly 1,000 military bases and forward operating posts in more than half the countries in the world, and is now expanding bases even further under the fabricated threat of China. Literally, no country in the world is safe from the harms of the U.S. military. Each year, the budget devoted to the weapons industries gets larger and larger. The Pentagon now consumes more than half the federal discretionary budget, forcing the average U.S. taxpayer to spend more than $1,000 per year on weapons contractors. And now, a number of influential Washington commentators are calling to increase annual military spending by almost 90%. We, the jurors of this tribunal, have heard evidence of their sociopathic crimes, evidence of their influence, their lobbying, their purchasing of representatives, their corporate takeover of this nation's foreign policy, and the mainstream media, all to generate profits. They have fabricated enemies designed to manufacture wars of choice, wars that have then been presented as advertisements for more weapons. As Arundhati Roy says, once weapons were manufactured to fight wars, now wars are manufactured to sell weapons. All while the U.S. democracy is reduced to ashes, a mere puppeteering of power. all while false consent is manufactured through the media and through Hollywood. We know that military representatives are 4 times as likely to be interviewed by the mainstream press. We know that the Pentagon and the CIA have exercised direct editorial control over more than 2,500 films and television shows, all working together to glorify war and mask racism as patriotism. This same philosophy of trading human lives for profit is also evident in the US healthcare system, where every year 68,000 Americans die to a lack of access of care, while insurance companies make $70 billion in annual profits. Meanwhile, around the world, millions, more than 4.5 million, have been slaughtered, bodies shredded, homes burned, land stolen, dreams denied by US weaponry in the past 20 years. 13 people have been killed every 30 minutes for the past 20 years by US weapons directly in Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Somalia, and Palestine. And millions, almost 40 million people have been displaced from their homes, their villages, their countries, their communities. And for us here, despair has been filling our souls as we watch again and again wars on endless repeat, all the while we are told to be realistic, to be practical, and all the while our planet quite literally burns. Fires are engulfing Los Angeles, burning homes to the ground and forcing even hospital patients to evacuate. And yesterday, President Biden pledged to distribute one-time payments of $770 to victims of the Los Angeles wildfire crisis. $770, totaling $77 million, while he, as president, has sent to Israel $26.7 billion in weapons over the last year. Their priorities are exceedingly clear. And we've seen images from the Los Angeles fires, but imagine those fires with paramedics, firefighters, and hospitals bombed and drones deliberately targeting the children as they flee the flames. And that will bring us closer to the horrors that US weapons have inflicted on Palestinians in Gaza. Israel has dropped over 85,000 tons of bombs on Palestinians in Gaza in 1 year, equaling nearly 6 Hiroshima atomic bombs dropped on a strip of land smaller than Detroit. People have literally been vaporized, like in Nagasaki. And every single bomb dropped on families in Gaza is dropped from a US-made plane. 300,000 Palestinians, that's 10 to 12% of the population in Gaza, have died in Gaza from this ongoing genocide. You've heard the number 45,000 people, but the 45,000 people are then people that have been able to be taken to a hospital and receive death certificates. Tens of thousands have died under the rubble, and with the use of 2,000-pound bombs, literally, human bodies have been pulverized and Palestinian families shredded. All because it is profitable for the United States. Today marks the 466th day of mass murder, starvation, and genocide in Gaza. And war is mass murder, deemed profitable for the US corporations, an advertisement for the manufacturers marketing wars. The politicians and the weapons engineers and the soldiers are serial killers. Their crimes normalized by directors and producers and journalists. And we say enough. In 1934, the Senate committee recommended price controls, the transfer of Navy shipyards out of private hands, and increased industrial taxes. Senator Nye suggested that upon a declaration of war by Congress, taxes on annual incomes under $10,000, which is the equivalent of $232,000 today, should automatically be doubled, and higher incomes should be taxed at 98%. Had that Senate committee succeeded in 1934, our world today may have been gloriously different. So what can we achieve today for tomorrow's world? We continue the struggle to hold the criminals accountable. We do not let the criminals go free, and we refuse to continue to subsidize their crimes. So let us start with the weapons manufacturers. Behind these corporations are people. They are not nameless. The CEOs of Lockheed Martin, Vance Kaufman, Robert Stevens, Marilyn Hewson, James Takelet. The CEOs of Boeing, Philip Condit, Harry Stonefire. Harry Stonesifier, James McNerney, Dennis Muhlenberg, David Calhoun, Robert Ortberg, the CEOs of Raytheon, Daniel Perman, William Swanson, Thomas Kennedy, Gregory Hayes, and Christopher Kallio, and the CEO of General Atomics, Neil Blue. They have all aided and abetted the US government in the commission of international war crimes against humanity, and genocide. We strive to hold them accountable. And just like the Hind Rajab Foundation strives to end Israel's cycle of impunity through, quote, offensive legal action against perpetrators, accomplices, and insiders of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Palestine. Hind Rajab, 5-year-old, who was killed deliberately by 335 Israeli bullets. Are we being impractical? Quite the opposite, accepting this ever-increasing domination of our world by the weapons manufacturers and the mining industries, accepting their destruction and ongoing humiliation, that would be impractical. Rather, we continue to devote ourselves to breaking their cycle and to rejecting all their impunities from the Israeli war crimes onwards. In the words of James Baldwin, I cannot be a pessimist because I am alive. To be a pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter. So I am forced to be an optimist. I am forced to believe that we can survive whatever we must survive. Thank you.
Thank you so much.